When I booked this guest for the podcast, I was aware of his involvement with natural history filmmaking and the sound that he had recorded for shows like Planet Earth 3. What I wasn't aware of was the motion pictures, the Hollywood movies that he'd also done sound for. And in fact, halfway through this show, it came out that he had been recording audio for a very large Hollywood movie that was about to be released in 2 weeks, but he couldn't speak about it at this point. Well, it wasn't until the end of the conversation that I realized that I wouldn't be releasing this episode until after that movie had been released. And I had a very good idea of what that movie was because I was looking forward to it coming out. And by now you've seen the episode artwork and you know what that movie is. That movie is Dune 2. And George was able to go out and film some incredible audio of deserts around the world that was used throughout the movie of Dune. And he only worked on Dune Part 2, not Dune Part 1. But they obviously wanted to enhance it with some real desert sound. And that's what George Vlad did. And not only that, something else that he got hold of me and told me about after the fact, after we recorded this conversation, was that he also did some of the audio for Mufasa, the Lion King, Disney's new movie coming out this year. And again, he wasn't able to tell me that at the time of recording this, but he is now. So this is a world first. George Vlad recorded some audio for Mufasa, the Lion King. This was a fantastic interview because George is the first sound recordist that I've had on the podcast. I've been looking to get someone on who specifically specializes in audio recordings, and George is the guy. He travels around the world to remote locations recording natural sound, and that gets put into movies, it gets put into natural history documentaries, and also video games, which he touches on a little bit as well. This is a fascinating conversation because he goes into his sponsorships, how he prices his audio tracks, the type of projects that he works on, and a whole bunch of other things. Advice to people who want to get into sound recording, the type of gear he uses. It's a treasure trove of information about audio recording. So without further ado, here is my excellent conversation with George Vlad. Good morning, George. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, Jake. I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm well. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in the UK, in Brighton, on the south coast.
All right, so it's got to be 4 o'clock, about 4 o'clock in the evening.
That's true.
Okay, yeah. 8 a.m. here, so bright and early on this side of the Pacific, or the Atlantic. I guess it depends which way you go. So, George, you're the first audio recordist that specifically specializes in audio that we've had on the podcast, which is super exciting because I've had lots of people ask me for people who specialize in audio recording. So before we get into some of the specifics on some of the projects you've done, let's just chat about when was the first moment that you realized that you wanted to record audio and specialize in natural sounds recording audio?
Ooh, I don't know. I can't remember that. I can tell you that when I was 5, 6 maybe, I was fascinated with the sounds of ravens in particular. I grew up in the countryside with my grandparents in Romania, and every day I would hear the ravens going away from their ravenry. There was a little woodland close to the village, so they would fly above, and I would hear them call. And every day was a different call for me. You know, as you know, ravens have a variety of calls, and I was just fascinated. And I thought it was a crow initially. I kept telling my grandma, that crow sounds weird. It's not the regular sound we hear from crows that we can see, actually. And I imagine I would have liked to record it back then, but I wasn't aware that that was a thing. And many years later, I got an interest in electronic music. I started to produce my own music. And somehow I was incorporating wildlife sounds as well, nature sounds. I was fiddling with a lot of effects like echo, reverb, creating a sense of space with my music and with my sounds. And it was a natural progression from there to going out and recording my own sounds. And then I did it enough that people noticed and started asking me for recordings of certain species and then soundscapes from interesting parts of the world. I've always been fascinated with exploring the natural world. So everything kind of conspired for me to become a sound recordist and a sound designer in this space, I guess.
So did you have other employment while you were kind of getting this going, or was it something that just fell into place and you were able to earn a living from straight away?
So about 21 years ago to be more exact, I discovered what's called a digital audio workstation. And that gave me the possibility of composing my own music and fiddling with effects and all kinds of things, as I mentioned earlier. And then it took me about 7 years from that point to start making a living with my skills in audio. But initially I was doing just sound design for video games mostly. I tried film as well. Film was not a very exciting medium back then. It was mostly about getting indie films into the festival circuit. It was very low budget or no budget gigs that were available to me as a beginner. In games, however, it was much easier to make headway because they had a budget. Even smaller games, there was a very short development cycle. You'd have them on the App Store very quickly, and you start generating money if you had a good product, obviously. And that allowed me to make a living with that and to pay the bills. And while I was doing that, I also went to university. I studied sound design for a couple of years. And in the process, I realized that being in the studio for too long was bad for my mental well-being.
Right.
Actually, I burnt out as well for a few months. But then going out into the field and turning my phone off and just listening and hopefully recording as well, that was one way for me to avoid this sort of cabin fever. And I think it took me probably another 5 years until I was able to make a living from sound recording. To go out, get projects, get paid to go to a certain place in the world, and come back with interesting goodies.
That's really interesting you bring up the kind of mental health side of it, because I think we all feel that. I know I do. If I'm in the studio, working on podcasts and editing and office work for too long, I certainly feel that kind of cabin fever, and I find it very hard to be motivated and get the work done without getting out and getting remotivated and inspired by being in the natural world or just being away doing something different. I think we all get that to some degree. So how did you find the work with the gaming in the first place? Like, how did you go about? Was it something that just serendipitously fell in your lap, or did you have to go and find the industry and show them what you could do to get them to pay you to make sound design for games?
It was not serendipitous. I had been playing video games since very young as well. I was fascinated with the early Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, or the early game consoles, basically.
Sure.
And I wasn't aware that sound design for video games was a thing for a very long time. But then when I realized it, I made it my ambition to become a sound designer and composer for video games. I had these skills that I wasn't even aware that I was cultivating. But when I felt confident enough, and obviously you never feel confident enough. I still have some sort of imposter syndrome there. But when I felt like I had enough work that I could show, I put together a small show reel. I got in touch, basically cold calling and cold emailing. And to me, that was a very good moment because this was around 2009 or so. It was the beginning of the App Store on the iPhone and the iPad. And there was there was a huge influx of video games on this very new platform. And a lot of it just lacked sound. There were no sounds at all in some of these games. So It was very easy to point out what these games were lacking and then to suggest a way to improve that. Initially, I did a few no-budget games, just to build the sort of portfolio. It wasn't anything I would be very proud of these days, but it was good enough to show, potential clients that I can do the job. I can work, with other people. And that was also working off site and working from home was not a big thing back then. It wasn't very easy. I had to also make do with, doing low skill jobs like, landscaping and gardening and driving people to work and all kinds of other things. But that ended very quickly. I think 1 year after I started to do this, I could say, okay, I'm done with all the other work. I can focus on the audio side of things now. I had enough clients to go around. I had too many, actually. I had to raise my prices so that I could get rid of the lower paying ones, and I could have some kind of mental health as well, to take breaks and to not work 100% of my time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing to do, to recognize that you can kind of cull those low-paying customers and go to your clients that are going to pay real money. It sets a bar for yourself. It's the same, with being a camera person. If you stay at a certain level and you keep, asking for the same amount of money from the low-paying clients, that's where you're going to be. It doesn't change unless you suddenly say, okay, now, I've got to find these higher-paying clients and stick with them.
Absolutely, yeah. Pricing creative work has been a huge issue, obviously, for people, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey. You don't know what to charge. If you charge too much, you're not going to get any clients. If you don't charge enough, it's not going to be sustainable. There's a tight balance there to be had. And then slowly, once you start gauging that, you can, every year, you can think about, how you've improved your services, how much have you learned in the meantime, and then by how much you can raise your rates. It's been a learning journey, and it still is, I guess. But yeah, you're absolutely right there.
How did you gauge that? I know it can be different for everyone. Like with filmmaking, obviously, we're talking about similar things, selling clips, like a 1 second to 10-second clips, but it's sold by the second these days. How do you go about finding what is the level that you should be charging? How did that work for you? So this is different for everyone. Sometimes it's just a case that you start charging something and you realize you're way too low, until you speak to other people. But what was it that helped you out there to realize what you should be charging?
Exactly as you said. I started charging, and then I realized it wasn't enough. It was very low. Some people really asked me, is this really the price for your services or your products? And I had to say, yeah, why? Is there something wrong with that? And they said, this is unexpectedly low. I wouldn't expect to pay such a small amount for, such good quality work or whatever I was doing back then. There's a parallel here. I sell what is called stock audio as well, which is probably very similar to stock video and stock images. Yeah. The way it works in the sound world, at least the kind of stuff I do, is I put together sound effects libraries or ambience libraries. For example, if I go to the Congo Basin and I spend a month there recording, I can put together 80 gigabytes of sound recordings in 24-bit, 96 kilohertz, about 5 minutes to 10 minutes in length each track, with good metadata, with good description, so that people who work on a project that's set there, or whatever their needs are, they can buy this collection of sounds and they can use it. They just drop it in their projects, basically, or they can do sound design or whatever it is they need. And initially, I was not charging enough for my libraries, and some people mentioned that to me. And then I noticed what others were charging, and then I tried to think about how much it costs me to go on such an expedition, to come back, do the work in the studio as well. And then you kind of, eventually you narrow that down to a certain price point, I guess, where it feels comfortable for you to keep doing the work. You're not going to become poor by spending too much on travel and then coming back and not earning enough. You're not going to get rich either, but it's a balance to be had there. And I've seen people who had a lot of passion initially, and they've gone out and done some huge projects and then basically bankrupted themselves. So now they're not working in the industry anymore because it wasn't sustainable for them. It's interesting because once you set some kind of expectation about your prices, if you all of a sudden double them, people are going to feel like they're cheated. Something's wrong there. Yeah. How come you were charging $100 for something yesterday, now you're charging $200? Sure. So you have to be very careful that moment when you first kind of put yourself out there. you have to think about it very, very deeply. What are you going to charge for yourself? What is the image you're projecting? You know, are you on the kind of lower side of services or products in terms of price? Are you kind of mid-priced, or are you one of those people who just wants to do really high involvement projects where it costs a lot to get them done, but also it costs a lot to buy the result of your work?
Sure. Yeah. So what is the bulk of your kind of earning a living? Is it selling stock clips, or is it being contracted to go out and being paid to get audio for a specific project or network?
It's contracts by far. I think the stock audio is a nice addition to that. Sometimes, there's a big studio that requires something like 20 seats for one library, and that's, it's a nice sum to be paid, but it's not nowhere near as close to as much as contracts and jobs I get, and also get sponsorships. And I work with a few brands like Rycote and Sennheiser and Telinga, and they have products they're testing. They need good photographs and videos from the field, behind the scenes, things like that. So I do some of that work as well. Whenever I go on a very interesting expedition, I will ask one of these companies, if they need any content from that part of the world. And they're very excited. There's not a lot of people who do this sort of work. Mm-hmm. I do some studio work as well. As I said, I still work as a sound designer for video games, although it's not as much as I used to back 10 years ago. But the one thing where sound effects libraries and stock audio has helped is where people find my work through them. So someone required. So last year I got a very exciting project to work on. I can't talk about it until it's released in a couple of weeks. But basically, someone found my recordings from the desert, and they asked me if I had way more of those. And I said, I don't have way more, but I can always organize a new expedition and go and record more for you. So that's how I ended up working on this huge Hollywood project.
I think I might be able to guess what that one is.
Yes. Yeah.
When you say a couple of weeks, yeah. Okay, that sounds exciting. We'll have to get back to you after that comes out. Sure. So okay, from so you were doing the games, and then you said that you were kind of getting cabin fever, you wanted to get out, and so you started doing expeditions. What was your first kind of big break with, say, a wildlife documentary or a documentary? What came first, and what was it that made you think, okay, this is something that could pay the bills?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't remember exactly when. So looking back at my my sort of career, there's never been one moment where something drastically changed. It's been more of a little steps, keep going, and then all of a sudden you notice that, okay, I've climbed quite a lot, looking back. There's been one moment where I was invited to work on a game project that was recreating sort of a post-apocalyptic version of the Western United States. It's called Horizon Forbidden West. And I had to go research a lot of the species that you hear there at the moment, and also think about how species would migrate over 1,000 years or so. That was a very cool project to work on. I started working on that about 4 years ago, and I was nominated for BAFTA and for a bunch of other prizes for awards for my work on that project. Some of my sounds were used in Planet Earth 3 quite recently. There are also some of the recordings from the Amazon were used in The Territory, which was a National Geographic production. I found out that my recordings of a volcano in Ethiopia were used in Fire of Love, which was nominated for an Oscar last year as well.
That's a Werner Herzog.
Yeah, no, the other one.
Oh, it's not. Oh, okay, that one's Nat Geo.
Yes, it's another Nat Geo production. Werner Herzog, I watched that one as well. It's very interesting too.
That's right. Yeah, he did a similar one.
Yes, but yeah, looking back, I don't think there was a moment when I realized this is something that can pay the bills. It's been a very slow burn and very slow kind of just gently making progress every day, every year.
Sure. I think that's how it works for most of us in this industry. There's not many people who just have this kind of meteoric rise. I liked your metaphor of looking back, taking steps, and you don't feel you're getting anywhere. You look back and you go, "Wow, I've come quite far." So take us through what it's like to go out on an expedition, right? Let's say you're heading out. I've seen you've been to the Atacama Desert, right? You're heading out, let's say, to the Atacama Desert. And I'm assuming before you head out, you have a really clear idea of what you're trying to get. Now, and of course, I don't know in the Atacama Desert how many different types of audio clips you can get. So take us through kind of the whole process of, your pre-production and then getting out there and how you actually execute it.
So I think there's two types of expeditions that I organize. One of them is when someone gets in touch with me and they ask me for a very specific thing, like the project in Algeria last year where I had to spend 2 weeks in the Sahara. And there's also places that I really want to go to and I have no idea what to expect there. And I go there for a recce and maybe I spend a week or a couple of weeks, get as much as I can in terms of sound recordings and go back. But then when someone asks me for something similar, I can say, look, this is a place where that can be recorded. In the Atacama, it was mostly a recce. I was in the States meeting with a studio that I work with in Dallas. And every time I go there, I like to tack on a couple of weeks or a week extra flying to South America because I'm already in that time zone and it's easier than flying out from the UK. And into the Atacama, I actually couldn't find a local fixer. I normally do a lot of research. I have friends who work as photographers, expedition leaders, and they can usually tell me, look, yeah, this person is very reliable. You can go meet with them. They're going to take you where you need. They're going to help you with everything. But for the Atacama, the way things work there is you just land there. You go to one of the most touristy places in the whole desert, San Pedro de Atacama. And then there's various tourism agencies, and they can put you in touch with guides. I was lucky enough to find, I had to speak to probably 10 different agencies. They were all suggesting that I get on a tourist bus and just, move from place to place along with everyone. But I wanted just the one person. I had already rented a vehicle for myself. I just wanted someone who knew the area well and who could take me to places where I could get away from man-made noise and things like that. And I found a very knowledgeable guide eventually, and he was able to take me to places like, I wanted a very barren place where there's just rocks and sand. And then I wanted a place where there was vegetation as well, but not too much of it. And then I wanted to get into the big rocks in the mountains at high altitude. So kind of a range of different situations, different landscapes that I could record to document the sounds of the desert. And maybe if there's like an interesting thing, like specific wildlife that could be calling, or when I was there was a very rare event. There was a big thunderstorm happening and there was a flooding as well. That's quite rare. The Atacama is probably the driest desert on Earth. But yeah, so he suggested that we go up into the mountains because we could get these gigantic reflections of thunder from the mountainside. So I went there, we set up some rigs there, we left them there for a few days. That was very interesting. But yeah, it varies from place to place. When I went to Gabon and the Congo, I couldn't find anyone. So there was no guide that I could find online, except for this one person that everyone would say, this is the worst guide you can find. Don't get in touch with him. And then they would, they have his phone number there. So, inevitably I had to get in touch with this person. He proved to be helpful in certain regards, but also very stubborn. And on some days he just didn't feel like helping us or working with us.
Oh, wow.
He ended up, so he was smuggling petrol and he spilled petrol on our kit. He ended up taking some other tourists on the vehicle that we rented, and we lost him for a couple of days. It was a huge misunderstanding and a lot of adventures there, but eventually we made that work as well. So yeah, it varies, I guess. There's no silver bullets. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you've been contracted for something specific, and they say, okay, we want a sound of a particular environment, I'm assuming that's easier for you because you're just heading to a particular spot and you're getting this clip. And how is that easier for you, or is it harder because then you're like, have I got it? And do I have to do this multiple times to make sure I've got it?
I will definitely do it multiple times, yeah. But it's easier in the regard that it helps me focus. For example, I went to Ethiopia twice, to this place in southern Ethiopia in the Bali Mountains. The first time I was there in 2018, I had no idea what to start with. There was so many things I wanted to record, from the soundscapes of the mountains, and then there's a plateau, and then there's a lowland where there's villages and there's interesting cultural celebrations. And between all of these, I was on the road 15, 16 hours a day, and I felt like I was just burning out from too much of doing that. Whereas if someone says you have to go record the Bali mountain vervet, which is a very interesting and rare species of monkey, I just go to where this monkey lives, and I'm going to put 20 rigs out there and then follow these monkeys with my shotgun microphone, and eventually I'm going to get it, and I'm going to get quite a lot of this type of content. So in that regard, it's helpful to focus and to have one thing or a handful of things. The second time around, when I went to the same place in 2019, I was able to plan better and to go set up some rigs in the lowlands, come back, spend a couple of days in the cloud forest, and then go up on the plateau as well. But it was more structured because I knew what to expect there.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So something that fascinates me is that, and I just can't imagine this at all, because being a videographer, right, when I go out, I film something, you look at the rushes, maybe if you're out in the field, or you come back to the studio, you look at the rushes. But typically, as a wildlife filmmaker, we're looking at rarely hours of footage, within rushes, right? Because we're in a situation where, you film minutes, maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours in a day. But not hours and hours of footage. Now, I'm assuming when you go out, if you've got 20 rigs out and you're leaving them recording, is this right? You just end up with multiple cards full of hours of audio. So how do you then go about collating that?
Sorry, 20 is a bit much. I think the most I've had in the field at the same time was probably 12 or 13. I do bring a lot of spares with me. Yeah, it's still a lot. It's hundreds of hours of recordings from one trip, let's say. I've got, I think, 26 terabytes, probably 30 terabytes of recordings just in my back catalog there. The way it works is so first of all, unattended sound recording, I don't want to affect the environment with my presence. I want to record nature as it is without the intrusion of myself or vehicles or other people. And obviously, you're aware of this. The animals are going to sense us, our smells and our sounds, and everything is going to cause them to be more stressed. We're going to hear more alarm calls than at any given point, unless they're the predator or something like that. But the way I do it is I set up these rigs, and maybe an hour or 2 hours later, after I've been there, the environment goes back to some kind of normal, and I can capture these soundscapes as they should be without the influence of humans. And then I want to get the day and night cycle as well, right? When you think about the dawn chorus isn't one point in time or half an hour or 10 minutes. The dawn chorus varies depending on weather, light, whatever else is happening in the environment. So time of the year, obviously. And if I get 24 hours in one environment, I will be able to see when that happens without having to go there and check, well, has it started, is it still going, whatever. So this just eliminates a lot of potential issues, if you want to record things by being there. Obviously, sometimes you have to be in a certain place to do a certain recording. I do that as well. But it helps me, be able to record a lot more in the space of, let's say, a week or 2 weeks. You can't really realistically spend a year or 3 years in a place like Gabon, because it will get to you eventually. But the more recording rigs that you have in different environments and different places, the more chances of you capturing something very cool and documenting it more thoroughly. Obviously, it's just a question of being able to listen to that back in the studio. I listen to recordings like I listen to music. For me, that is music to my ears, and I haven't listened to everything I've ever recorded, but there are ways to see what you have in your recording, using a spectrogram and looking at the waveform. Sometimes nighttime is, 10 hours of crickets and cicadas. Even that is interesting to see how that evolves, from maybe 3 species to 20 species and back to 2 species. But you can see that on a spectrogram. You can look at it and see what's in a few hours of recordings without having to listen to everything. If you're looking for something very specific, like a leopard call, for example, you look at the bottom of the spectrogram and the low frequencies, and then you can just hone into that and cut that bit out, send it to whoever needs it, and you don't have to listen to everything. I'm not sure how you do that with video. I think for rushes, as you said, you don't have as many, but you have to watch everything once more, decide which parts is the best, and obviously send it to whoever needs it. But for me, it's never been a tedious thing. I love listening to these recordings. I've got recordings from 10, 15 years ago that I still listen to, go back, maybe discover little things that I missed the first time around. So it's always pleasant.
Well, and of course you have a YouTube channel where you put them up as like ambient sound recordings that people can play in the background, and you put video to them as well, right?
Not always. So if I don't have good enough video from a location, it doesn't always happen. My main focus is always getting the good sounds, and then if I have enough time, I'm going to try and get a little bit of video as well that I can loop. But I can use a photograph. I have Adobe After Effects. I can show a little animation, with the frequency that are playing, and that helps. If you just put a photograph and a sound recording on YouTube, it's not going to be recommended as much because there's nothing moving in the frame.
Sure.
But as long as you have that little animation there, it helps, I guess, with the algorithm. But yeah, that's one thing I do with my recordings. I've got very good response from these soundscapes. A lot of people enjoy just the discovery of soundscapes from different parts of the world, places they might never be able to get to otherwise. Others sleep to my recordings. They might use them to meditate or to work or to focus. It's one way to deliver these recordings, and there's a huge market for it. I think I was limiting myself to SoundCloud and other more obscure platforms for a while, but YouTube has been a very good tool for marketing and for reaching people.
Yeah, and of course, with the rise of meditation and just in general, people are becoming more mindful, and your website, mindful-audio.com, says it all, really. I think that's probably helped out a lot with these. Do you sell clips to meditation apps and things like that? I know with certain ones I've used in the past, there's certainly ambient music being played in the background.
Yes, I work with a few of these. There's one initiative called Earth.fm that I work with very closely, and there's the side of just the listening and meditation side and mindfulness side. They also mentor sound recordists from the global south, to be able to capture their own recordings, because obviously someone who lives in a very interesting place, they're the best people to record it and to tell a story with it. So yeah, I work with a number of these initiatives, and it's a very satisfying aspect of my job for sure.
So what kind of gear are you using? I'm assuming you've got an array of different microphones for different scenarios. So just run us through the different styles of microphones you use for capturing different audio.
So yeah, let's start with recorders actually. So I use Sound Devices 633 for anything that is critical, because that records onto media, it has a variety of powering options, and it's a solid recorder. I've had that for 14 years probably or something like that, and it never lets me down. I use that when I have to be in a very unforgiving environment. That tends to work better in really cold environments or really hot environments, really high humidity. And I will plug microphones into it. Like if I want to record something focused, I will record with a shotgun microphone, like the Sennheiser MKH8060. I used to record ambiances with something called a double mid-side rig, which is a figure-8 microphone and 2 cardioid microphones. It might be a bit too technical, but basically you can derive a surround soundscape from recording with only 3 microphones. The problem with that is all the microphones are bundled together. They're very close to each other. And when you think about how us humans hear sounds, our ears and eardrums are spread apart. They're about 17 centimeters apart. There's a certain angle, like 110 degrees, towards which we hear better. And the consensus is that it's better to have your microphones that you record stereo with at least 10 to 15 centimeters apart, maybe with some kind of baffle in between them. That definitely sounds like a better reproduction of the soundscape and a more satisfying one than just having microphones close up. I use small recorders as well. There's one called the Sony PCM-A10. It's about the size. It's smaller than a phone, let's say, and thinner than a phone. And you can plug very little microphones into it, and it becomes very inconspicuous. That's the best thing about it. If you're recording, let's say, in an area where there's going to be a lot of wildlife activity, you don't want the wildlife to come by, like a monkey, for example, or a hyena, and notice a big change in their environment. Because obviously they're going to be interested. They might bite it, destroy it, which has happened many times.
Right. I can imagine.
So with these inconspicuous rigs, it's very easy to go unnoticed. So you set them up somewhere. It's like being a fly on the wall somewhere. You just record the soundscape as it is. In places like the desert, I need to use what's called a blimp to protect the microphones from direct wind. Otherwise, if the wind hits the capsule, it's going to result in a lot of low frequency energy, which is not even, you don't hear it, but it causes a lot of distortion and very bad sound. So these blimps that I have, they help mitigate that, with the furry covers that you always see on recording sets. That is not an inconspicuous rig. As soon as you put it out, sometimes the owls mistake them for rodents and they're going to try and attack them. Sometimes, you have people coming over and asking you what you're up to. It's a more visible way of recording. But if you don't have a choice, sometimes it's too windy to record with little lavalier microphones.
Well, so, and actually on that, I was going to ask you just about wind. In terms of if you're trying to get an environment and it's really windy, do you then make a point of going back and trying to catch that place when it's not windy? So you have both options, or I guess some places are just windy all the time?
Well, for the desert, there's nothing happening if it's not windy generally, unless you're very close to a waterhole or something. In the Sahara, my aim was to record the wind in certain environments around big mountains, big rocks. And that is a very subtle sound as well. You need microphones that have very low self-noise and recorders with preamps that have very low self-noise. Otherwise, you're going to be recording the sound of your equipment instead of the sound of the environment. Yeah. But generally, I want to capture both, windy situations and calm situations, because that's the palette of what's happening in that environment. I want to capture all kinds of weather as well. So in the rainforest, you want to capture a calm day and then a rainy day and maybe a windy day as well. So that you have as many possibilities of recreating this environment in post afterwards.
So you always have enough time on your trips to make sure you can do that. Because I know with filmmaking, a lot of the time we go out on these trips and it's like, we've got to get this scene today, and you get what you can and you move on. I'm assuming you just give yourself the time you need to get what you need.
Well, so that's one of the reasons I don't like to work with a team, with a crew on a shoot, because everyone has their own timing and schedules. There's going to be a lot of man-made sound, a lot of people, a lot of machinery and stuff. I generally can have enough time in a location, but you never know. As I said, when I went to the Atacama, I was going to record the driest place on Earth, and I ended up recording thunderstorms. So you never know what you can find, especially since climate change wreaks so much havoc and everything is changing. And I'm off to the Pantanal in Brazil in a couple of months, and until a few years ago you could only fly into this place I want to go to, but it sounds like you can drive in because it's been so dry for the past 3 or 4 years that it's not a problem anymore, which obviously it's a huge problem, but it's not going to be the proper rainy season.
So, moving on, Planet Earth 3, obviously you've got some, I think was it deserts? No, it was forests, I think. Forests you're in?
The Amazon and Borneo rainforests,
Okay, so were you contracted for that gig, or did they come to you looking for specific sounds during the edit?
They just came to me, they needed recordings from these places and a few others that I did not have. Eventually, at some point, I will end up working on some of these big shoots. But equally, it was a very exciting project to be a part of, and I was very happy when I got that email.
So how much of a clip do you? I mean, I'm assuming that they're taking your clips and they're putting them across a sequence of images. Are you able to tell when you watch Planet Earth now? Are you able to tell where your clip comes in? You're like, oh, those are my raindrops.
Raindrops, probably not. Although maybe if I listen very carefully and I listen in stereo, I can probably tell, because there's a lot of bad rain recordings out there. There's you see some of these kind of lower budget production where someone's in a big rainforest and you hear rain that's falling from a roof somewhere, and there's a reflection from the walls of the house. It sounds, it's for my ears, it's very clear. For someone else's, maybe not. They might think something, something's odd about this, but they don't think twice about it. But for birdsong, recordings of wildlife, I can usually recognize my own recordings, and I've heard them in video games and in TV series and films, and I could say, oh, maybe that's my recording. I went back and checked. Yes, obviously I might be wrong. I don't know. I don't want to feel like my recordings are in everything, but
sure.
If I listen to some of my recordings for long enough, you remember a certain sequence. I have a very good memory for sounds. That's how my brain works. I don't have a good memory about visuals, but sounds are, they hit me in a different way. So I can probably tell if there's, let's say, 5 species calling, and I can kind of tell about the rhythm, if it's my recording or not.
Yeah. Well, what's your favorite place to go and record, or favorite sounds to record? Do you have specifics?
Not really, no. I love deserts. I love rainforests. I love volcanoes. I love temperate forests as well. I was just in Romania, in the place I grew up in. I went to the mountains, and there was, this beautiful silence where you could hear snow falling onto snow, or onto leaves or onto trees. And then we found, there's a local pack of wolves that ends up hunting and traveling that area. I did not record them this time, but one day I'll get their calls as well. Yeah, I mean, the natural world, that's what fascinates me. And there's something interesting everywhere, even if you're in the desert and you think there's nothing here. Just listen for long enough and you're going to hear a lot of subtle detail and things that you might miss because we live in such a noisy world.
Yeah, and I was going to say that. I mean, we are so our hearing, I think, has been affected so much just by the stuff that we're not even aware of. I mean, we can think we're in a quiet place and we've got really aircraft, in the background and hums of engines and things going on that we're just so accustomed to we don't notice are there. Two things come to mind. One is locally here when we had a huge snowfall and we were out on my wife's project doing mountain lion studies, and we had to go up into the mountains in a lot of snow, post-holing through about 4 feet of snow. And I remember standing in this snow in these pine trees and just how the snow just seems to absorb everything. And suddenly it's like you're in a soundproof room. And like you say, you could hear bits of snow just falling off a tree or a piece of snow coming down and landing on a tree. Incredible. And I can only imagine that after a time spent in a quiet environment like that, your hearing must just get more and more, enhanced, or back to what it perhaps was originally. Another time was traveling to the Northwest Territories. Have you ever done any recordings up in Northwest Territories of Canada?
No, I'm not. It's on my list. It's on my short list.
Okay.
And hopefully I'll get there this year or the next.
Yeah, I mean, up there, it's eerily quiet because there's, very few planes that really go over that specific area. Certainly not low unless they're mining planes or outfitters. But it is so unbelievably quiet that you think something's wrong with your hearing. When you first get there, you think something's gone wrong because you're used to all this background noise that is just the norm. And even, in a quiet environment like in your office, recording sound. Like when I just bought an SSL mixer preamp for this mic. You like SSL? I just got one of these because I had too much noise coming from the old one, like you were saying, too much device noise. And it's funny how when I've, was setting this up and testing the mic and doing all those things, how you realize, wow, you can hear every electronic device in the room doing its thing, like just current passing through those devices. There's a hum, and it's something that we're just so used to now that we don't hear it. Are you finding that on a regular basis when you go out somewhere? Are you just, you're probably used to it, but are you in awe when you get to those places just how all that stuff disappears?
Not necessarily, because that to me is where we should be. I told you I grew up in the countryside. The sounds I would hear were the sounds of nature. In winter, it was very still and very quiet. In summer, it was very lush, in the spring. To my ears, this is very noisy. I also have something called hyperacusis, which means I can hear a lot of tiny sounds that other people just ignore or don't even register. So there's a very interesting anecdote. I used to live in a flat in Guildford in the UK here. And I had a neighbor upstairs who had their alarm set for 7 a.m. every morning. So I would hear his alarm, and then I would hear him sigh every morning. So he would wake up and he's like, and then he would go to work. So I could hear that through the wall, basically. It's not to say that my hearing is superhuman, but the walls are quite thin in buildings in the UK. But basically, for me, everything is always quite noisy, and I take steps, to minimize the amount of noise that gets into my bedroom or into my studio where I live. Not always possible, for sure. But when I get to a desert, for example, or to a forest in winter, I usually think, oh, this is good. This is nice. And maybe a day afterwards, I can start hearing, like very little detail and things that my brain needs a bit of adjustment to get to hear. I'm not feeling weird or odd. To me, that's lovely. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Being able to be away from the sounds of airplanes, the sounds of traffic, sounds of industry, sounds of people. I don't mind that at all. No.
And it sounds like you've honed your hearing because you're using it all the time. You're using it in a way that we probably were built to use our hearing. Looking for danger and looking for specific sounds and things as threat signals or danger. Back in the day, which of course I don't think any of us would recognize that anymore. With the way our hearing is. Just going back to your sponsorship deals, I think people find it fascinating to find out, what kind of deals you get and how. I mean, I know within the filming industry, it can be very, very hard to get sponsorship deals because there's so many people filming. I think really the main thing that sets people apart with good sponsorship deals is having a huge following this day and age. So, if you have 1 million people following you on social media, then companies are interested in sponsoring you because they know their stuff is going to get seen. But if you do you have I don't think you have a massive following, do you? Maybe you do have a massive following.
No, not nearly. No. So I have about 12,000 followers on YouTube, and a handful of followers on Instagram and others. I've never got onto the bandwagon, like just trying to get as many followers as possible. That's not my thing. I'm not an influencer or someone who makes their job to be on YouTube or to be on social media.
Sure.
That's just a side product of my work. I noticed this maybe 5-6 years ago when I had a little Sony recorder. I went to record in Scotland and left it out overnight. The screen froze, but it was still recording, so I posted a photo of that. And I got a lot of people, they got in touch with me and they said, "Oh, I'm going to buy this recorder because it looks like you're doing a good job with it, and it's not, it's very sturdy. It's not going to die if you let it out, leave it out in the cold and things like that." And I have access to a lot of equipment. I'm fortunate enough to be able to buy it, and I know people, they get in touch with me. They can't afford to buy everything and then think whether it's good or not or whether it's going to last a long time. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather do this and help my fellow sound recordists, sound designers. And it just slowly grew. I posted some reviews online, and I had a very angry rep from Sound Devices get in touch with me when I reviewed one of their recorders, and I was not very happy about it. They were not very happy about my review, but then they released a second, they released Mark II of these recorders with most of these things that I noticed they had fixed. So, in the end, it's not necessarily about the following. I think the main difference between the world of video and photography and the world of sound is that there's so few people doing the stuff I do. So even if I wasn't doing a good job, there's not many other people who are doing it. So, whatever, how many followers do you have? Yeah. 12,000. That's fine. We'll take it because there's no one else who's doing this kind of stuff.
Well, and they can take the things that you provide them and they can use them on their audience as a review or showing someone like yourself who's a professional in the field using them.
True. But it's also about what you offer in exchange. I've always been very proactive. No one ever approached me and asked me if I wanted to use their products. I always had to go out email them and tell them and basically pitch my projects and my expeditions. And I think once you've done it a few times, you kind of develop a sense for what a company needs. And I've noticed, some of these companies, they have beautiful studio photography of their microphones and their recorders. But then when, these are recorders that should be used in the field. They're called field recorders. And they don't have any photos of their recorders in the field. So
Right.
I went out and took some photos and some videos. I said, look, this is the kind of stuff I can get for you, sponsor my expedition, and I'm going to come back with 10 photos, 5 videos. I'm going to make a quick show reel for your social media, maybe write a blog post for you, and in the process, it gives you legitimacy, because I'm using your equipment, but it gives me legitimacy because you're recognizing me as a sound recordist. So, it goes both ways. It's an interesting relationship that I have with these brands. Nowadays, I'm collaborating with more of them, and I find that I can't keep up with all the free stuff I get, so I have to say no to a few. I don't think that's a bad problem to have, but at the same time, it can get out of hand as well.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're not careful, you find that you're turning into a reviewer rather than being out there doing the job you're setting out to do. When you said, if you're contacting them saying, hey, we're going on this expedition, we're going to be using your recorder or your wind blocker or whatever it might be, do you come up with a value for that? Do you say, hey, give me $5,000, or do you wait for them to tell you what they're willing to put in for what you can provide?
Usually, in my experience, if you wait for someone to tell you what they can give you, it's usually a very low ball figure. So
right.
I look at my costs. If let's say my trip costs $15,000, I will say, sponsor me for $5,000 or something like that, and I'll get you this in exchange. And then obviously there's going to be some negotiation. They can offer you equipment instead of money, or whatever, something else. It's always a bit of give and take there. But I've been okay. I've been happy with the deals I've had so far. You have to kind of go through the motions of putting together a deck, to show. It doesn't really. You can't really just say, I'm going to go and do that, and that's it. You have to kind of show stuff you've done before. You have to show photos from your previous expeditions. You have to show what you can get for them. If you're talking about writing a blog post, can you write? You have to explain to them. I've written in the past for this magazine or for my blog even, so that you become more credible that way. At least initially, and then once they know what you can get, you have this relationship. It's much easier to build on something you've already done together.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's fabulous advice. I think there's a lot of people who would like to. I mean, we're all using this technology these days, and I think we all fall in love with various bits of technology we use. I know for me, there's a few things I just go, wow, this thing is brilliant. I could not do my job without this. And not everything, but it might be just one of, 40 items. I just think this thing is brilliant. Those are the things that you really want to do those reviews and really, from my point of view, I think it can be hard because so many people just want free gear. They just want to use it. They just want to say, hey, I'm sponsored, that kind of thing. I had sponsorship years ago before the internet by Lover boots.
Okay.
On my expeditions. And I fell in love with those boots because they're expensive boots. But man, they last. I had boots that were just traveling continents, and they were so comfortable that I couldn't give them high enough praise. I've worn more uncomfortable boots than I have really comfortable boots. So it's things like that, having those deals where I'm not making this stuff up. It's like, this is the real deal. I love this product, and I think it's important to keep that in mind when you get into those kind of sponsorship deals.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's also about, for me at least, I'm not going to work with someone I've never used their products before. I want it to be a question of, do I trust their products? If I don't, it's going to show. And I have to stop 1 second. My cat wants to come in.
Oh, sure.
Come on, kitty cat.
That's right. It's a wildlife podcast, so it's perfect. It's a cat.
Yes. So with Sennheiser, I'd been using their products for more than 10 years before I approached them and asked them to sponsor me. I'm talking to Sony at the moment. I've been using Sony cameras and microphones for probably as long as I've been working, and they sent me some kit recently. I'm going to have to have a look and see how I can use it. I'm not a reviewer, as you said. You
Sure.
can become a
Yeah.
reviewer. There's many people who just make a living out of that and they seem happy. For me, I'm happy to go out and record and bring back interesting sounds from the wilderness. And anything else is just me using tools. That's it. You can use a tool in a good way. You can use a tool in a bad way.
Yeah.
In the process, you can review it, but it's not going to be my main focus.
Sure, absolutely. So if you had some advice, George, for anyone looking to get into sound recording, or they might already be doing sound recording, and they're looking to further their career in it, what advice? Let's do this a couple of ways. Well, let's do one in terms of technique. If there's a technical piece of advice you could give someone, because I'm sure I know it's not easy. Hey, I record audio. It's just slightly different, right? We do it typically interview style or on the top of the camera. We're trying to get natural sounds. Like you say, it's a nightmare when you've got a crew because someone's eating a candy bar in the background or something, right? So it can be extremely hard. And as we always talk about on here and just in general as filmmakers, audio is more important than video, right? And I'll say that again because it is so important. Audio is more important than the footage we get as cinematographers. I think we've all watched really beautiful, whether it's movies or documentaries that have terrible audio and they're really hard to watch. Vice versa, the flip side of that is the side where you've got mediocre footage with great audio, and it can be, like archive footage from, 50, 100 years ago, and it can be, much easier to watch a story in that way. So piece of technical advice for people recording audio out in a natural environment.
Piece of technical advice. I think for a very long time, there was a huge barrier to entry, cost. It used to cost an arm and a leg to get decent recording equipment. Nowadays, we're living in the good times. You can spend, I think, $400, even less than that. And you can get a decent recording rig and can go out and make your own recordings. And it's not about the money anymore, which is perfect, it's brilliant. It's all about your technique and how much time you spend in the field. For example, if you have £10,000 worth of kit, and you don't know how to use it, you go out, you fiddle with it for a bit, you press record, you've set your levels in the wrong way, or maybe you're not using the right wind protection, you can come back with zero usable sound. You can have the cheapest recording rig, a handheld recorder, and you can go out with that, and you can be mindful of how you're recording and listen out and find a good place for it, and think about, what's going to happen, leave it out for a bit. You can get some good recordings, some very lovely soundscapes with it. So there's nothing stopping, obviously there's places where $400 is a lot of money, so even that is a big barrier to entry. But generally for us living in the Western world, it's a very small price to pay, to get into the field of field recording. And from there, it's all about how much you go out into the field, come back in the studio, listen to your recordings, learn from your mistakes, and then go back again. And a lot of people want the easy answer, they just want to spend some money and all of a sudden their game is improved, but it doesn't work like that. You have to put in the work. That's the only way to do a good job as a sound recordist and to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from a point of view of furthering their career, if someone's already recording audio or, they're looking to progress and actually sell their audio to networks, to, specific shows, what is the best way of getting your stuff heard and making contacts within the industry?
You have to sell yourself. And I used to be very shy about it. I didn't like whenever money as a subject was brought on. Whenever you have to talk about these things, it's tough. It's not easy. We're not, we want to be creative people. We want to go out, record, come back, and that's it. We want to do our work like that. You have to learn what marketing is. Seth Godin said that you're not selling a product, or a service. You're selling a story. You're telling someone a story, and people are going to believe in it, and then they're going to want to purchase things from you and hire you, and all these things. So you have to find what's special about you. What is your story? What are you going to do? Why are you better or more interesting than other people who do the same thing? And then make that your mission, the story of yourself, of your brand. Think about branding as well. whose name are you going to think about when you talk about, a podcast that talks about wildlife, right? It's Jake, right? It's wildlife filmmaking podcast, right? Master Wildlife Filmmaking. That's a very good way to think about how you can set yourself apart. And then obviously you have to do the socializing aspect, meeting people face to face. Even if we live in, post-COVID, post-lockdowns, we work from home, everyone's online, everyone's socializing on LinkedIn and Facebook. Nothing beats meeting people face to face and talking to them and, not selling anything, just being friendly, being a nice person. People want to work with people they know, people they like to hang out with. And that's been, that's made a big difference for me in the past. Yeah, I think that's it. And obviously, improving your craft, always working, always thinking about how you can get better without burning out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that can be really, really important. Just on that, you've mentioned burnout earlier, and I like sometimes to get into the kind of mental health aspect because I think it affects us all one way or another. You said you burnt out. What was your what was the way that you got back into it? How did you clear your mind and kind of say, this is what I want to do, and I've just got to find a way to make it work? What was the trick for you?
So when that happened the first time, and probably the worst, was I was studying at university, so I was doing about 100 hours a week between projects for university and projects for clients. And after a few months of that, I was not sleeping well. I couldn't focus. It was tough. And then I had, the only way to do that, I had to take a break from all work. So I emailed my clients and said, look, this is, it was December, so it was very fortunate that it was the holidays. No one was working too much. I just turned my phone off. I flew back to Romania. I went into the mountains. There was no signal. There was nothing there. Just driving around, hiking in deep snow, kind of punishing my body, because I was usually, for sitting too much, I was feeling very static and not very fit. So just hiking a lot, doing a lot of physical activity, breathing, being mindful, thinking about what I could hear, what I could see, doing photography, doing things that take time, like making things with my hands, building little covers for my microphone so that the snow or rain wouldn't fall directly onto them. Basically anything but the stuff that took me there, the working in the studio. And then when I got back to it a couple of months later, I found that I was creative again. It didn't take me days to get something done. I could do it in a few hours like it used to be the case. But once I got back, I also promised myself that I would not spend 100 hours in the studio, in a given week ever. I would, kind of check in with myself and see where I'm at and think about, am I exhausted? Do I need to go for a walk? Mm-hmm. Do I need to take a longer break? Do I need to take a long weekend? And between all of these things, I managed to get back to be excited about my work again, to be creative again, to, added this element of the field recording aspect and the expeditions to my work as well. But it's a very different mindset, so it doesn't feel like I'm always working or, just doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, that's really good to know. It's great to have boundaries when it comes to work and just different sections of work, whether it be office work or work in the field and what have you. I certainly have to make boundaries. I've got kids and I want to see them and I want to be, 100% with them and mindful of my time with them. And I found a lot of the time when I'm busy, that becomes almost impossible to do, because I'm just constantly thinking, I've got to do this. And then I kind of rush out the office, go and spend time with them, but I'm not really with them. And I had to think very hard about that, about how to switch off and say, this is work time and I will deal with this tomorrow. And I think once you do that, it actually gets easier because you find you become more present during your work as well as you do with your family. And so you actually get more done in that work time than you did the times when you're doing those 100-hour weeks and you're just, you're trying to make every second count. And really what you're doing is you're not working as effectively as you could be. But it's a hard journey, hard lesson to learn. George, thank you so much for taking the time out this morning to, or your afternoon to be on the podcast. Where can people find you? I know you got a YouTube channel, you got a website. Where are those things?
So my YouTube channel is George Vlad, YouTube/ George Vlad. Or they changed it. I think there's an @ as well now, youtube.com @George Vlad. My website is mindful-audio.com. And that's about it. Or just Google George Vlad, and you'll find a whole bunch of social media that I never managed to catch up with and post on. But yeah, that's mostly where you can find me. I blog every now and then. I do mentorships. I do a whole bunch of things whenever I get to it. As you said, it's not easy to do all of this well, but we can try.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put links to all of those different places on the website page at jakewillers.com podcasts. People can find you there and click directly on those links. That's fantastic. I've got to ask you one last thing. This podcast is not going to go out until probably a good month, if not more.
Okay.
So the secret project you're working on, are you allowed, even if it goes out after the movies come out, are you allowed to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. It's Dune Part 2.
I thought it was. Yeah, it sounds exciting. So did you go out into the field and get stuff specifically for them, or again was that you did? Wow, that must have been exciting to do that. And that's Hans Zimmer, right, doing the composing for that.
It is, yeah, and it's Richard King who did supervising sound editing on it. He's got 4 Oscars, and I went to LA last year and had lunch with him, and I couldn't believe it felt surreal to be there to work with him and to chat with him and to see how lovely he is as a person. I worked with Dave Whitehead as well. He's one of my sound design heroes as well. He's worked on some amazing projects. It was lovely. I'm incredibly privileged to have had the chance to work on this project.
How did they find you for this particular job?
So Dave had some of my libraries from the Arabian Desert and from the Namib Desert. And he got in touch and he said he wants a lot more of that kind of stuff and a few extra things that I couldn't offer him. And I said, look, I can put together a trip. And I had a few options for him, a few different countries that I was looking at. He sent me some, he put together, what is it called? It's called photo. Anyway, he sent me a few ideas and things. And then, we agreed on Algeria.
So do you know yet how it's being used? Is it throughout the film, or is it it's just throughout? There's a whole, because the whole thing's set in the spice deserts, right? Pretty much. Yeah,
and I had to record sounds of wind in caves and among big rocks as well. So interior, exterior, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of that. And for some of the under sand things, I use hydrophones, special microphones that record underwater, but I put them under the sand, and I got some interesting sounds of motions and impacts and things like that.
And you didn't work on Dune Part 1? No, so they were looking for some new stuff, obviously, for this film. That's fantastic. I'll be going to see it, so I'll keep an ear out and look for you in the credits. Awesome. That sounds good. Awesome. Thank you so much, George. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Jake. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Behind the Wild Lens podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please think about leaving a rating and a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's really important to keep these podcasts sustainable and to get new listeners. So I would really, really appreciate it if you could do that. Maybe just give it a star rating. And if you do have something else to add, leave a comment also. That would be fantastic. And also, if you're into wildlife filmmaking, if you want to try and break into the industry, if you're an aspiring wildlife filmmaker, if you're already in the industry and you want to network with other wildlife filmmakers, then head over to jakewillers.com. That's JAKEWILLERS.com and join our free wildlife filmmakers community. We have hundreds of people inside there who are all either in the industry or aspiring to get into the industry. But either way, we're all wildlife filmmakers, and it's a place where we can network, discuss our work, show our work, and collaborate with each other. Head over to jakewillers.com and check out the wildlife filmmakers community.